What's going on, YouTube? Florida Man Knives here with one of my favorite knives of all time. This is, of course, a vintage Spyderco, specifically the C38 Jess Horn Lightweight. So this knife right here is actually my dad's, and he has lent it to me for review. He has carried it off and on throughout the years, particularly rotating it with the Delica, and I honestly just love this knife so much. One of my favorite Spyderco models of all time for sure. And I'll be just briefly discussing it in this video. So starting off, the Jess Horn Lightweight was introduced in 1997 and was actually discontinued in 2000. Now they did do a Burgundy FRN sprint run in 2006, but otherwise I believe that is the extent of this particular knife. So Jess Horn is definitely a renowned knife designer. You can check out my baby horn videos, which was another Spyderco that they made. And I had the 2017 sprint run of that particular knife, but this one right here is definitely a really cool vintage model, I would guess from the late 90s for sure. And you can see really nice little blade shape. This is a hologram blade with a spear point tip. Of course, you do have black FRN handles. No stainless steel liners though, so this thing is incredibly lightweight. And honestly, the ergonomics on this are phenomenal. So very slim knife, but you can see I have extra large hands if you do not watch the channel, and I get a full 4-finger grip on this knife. Honestly, just one of the best knife handles in my opinion that I've ever experienced, and I just really cannot say enough good things about this knife. So the black stainless steel pocket clip is a really nice touch in my opinion, of course with the gold Spyderco logo. You can see it definitely has shown some wear. Again, this is my dad's knife and he does carry it. You can also see this knife is featuring AUS 8 steel, which is another indicator of the era of this knife. Spyderco did work with AUS 8 just for a few years in the late 90s and very early 2000s. But this knife was viewed as a gentleman's knife at the time and was available both in a plain edge and then the combo edge, which you can see is featured here. So really just a fantastic design overall, super slim in the pocket you can see, and just super unique. Just a fan of the FRN handles, of course. If you're a Spyderco fanboy, you probably won't mind FRN's handles or scales. And just, again, super cool, Seiki City, Japan. And one of the things that I think is so cool about this knife is the fact that they have Jess Horn just endlessly throughout the show side of this scale. So the original MSRP on this knife was $69.95, and you can see it's definitely a relatively small knife overall. The length is 7.25 inches overall, the handle length is 4 inches, and your blade length is going to be 3.25 inches. One thing I also wanted to note, as is typical on these vintage Spydercos, you can see you've got a sharpening coil, which is really cool and something that they do not do that often anymore. Typically it's only seen on their sprint runs and exclusives for some throwback models. But anyways, the blade thickness, definitely a thin slicey little blade, especially with the hollow grind coming in at 0.09375 inches. Your cutting edge is going to be 2.875 inches with that sharpening coil and of course just the general shape of the blade. Your weight, excuse me, is supposedly 1.75 ounces, and that's something that I'm really curious to see for myself. Again, this thing is extremely lightweight, and you can see coming in 1.73 ounces via my scale, so pretty on point from what Spyderco was indicating back in the day, and that is just ridiculous. I mean, that's lighter than the Delica, and as far as the Spydercos goes, honestly, besides the Ladybug and Manbug and Jester, only the Dragonfly 2 is a lighter knife. So another interesting feature, the hole size is pretty small, coming in at 0.4375 inches, but you can see I have absolutely no issues engaging that whatsoever. And real quick, I'm going to go ahead and pause this and grab a couple of knives for comparison. Just realized that I should do that real quick, even though this is not exactly a knife that you can purchase today. But if you are able to get your hands on one on the secondary market, I definitely would recommend it. And as mentioned, here's going to be a couple of knives for comparison. I did grab the Delica first because it is, in my opinion, definitely the most comparable knife to the Jess Horn Lightweight. You can see the overall cutting edge on the Jess Horn is actually going to be a little bit longer. The blade length is going to be, or handle length, excuse me, is going to be slightly shorter, but functional handle length is honestly about the same. And one thing I wanted to note here, and pretty much my only complaint with the Delica, is the way they have this portion curved up here. It forces your fingers down, and my middle finger ends up kind of resting right at that point there. So, you know, that is due to the size of my hands, but still just my personal complaint, as where the Jess Horn Lightweight, they put just one hump in here as opposed to the two, which I prefer, and it's a little bit further back. So just the way they did it, my middle finger doesn't quite rest on it like it does on the Delica, and that is something that I just think they did a great job of, and it's one of the reasons that this is one of my favorite knives of all time. And honestly, I will probably look to get one of my own. Again, this is my dad's, and I've looked at them off and on over the years. I mean, they're not too expensive, relatively speaking, but for Aus-8 steel nowadays, you will be paying a pretty penny for one of these, again, relatively speaking. A couple of other Spydercos for comparison, just real quick, got the Paramilitary 2 there. And then one knife that I had mentioned already in this video, the Dragonfly 2. This one right here is the S30V variant, but you can see a pretty slim knife, but a great EDC size, and a knife that I really hope that they bring back, you know, whether it be in a sprint run or an exclusive. It's just a knife that really doesn't get enough love. I really don't see anybody talking about this. They're very rare, I suppose. Not a lot of people have them in their collections, or if they do, they're probably just hardcore Spyderco collectors that don't have a YouTube channel. So I was really, really grateful to my dad that he lent this to me for review and just to make a video on it. I have not carried this knife recently, but I have used it throughout my whole life, off and on. And, you know, you just touch the edge up. It's also pretty easy to clean up. Serrations, of course, that's a different story, but I'm a huge fan of the Spyderco serrations. They just aesthetically are, of course, very cool looking, but functionally they work very well. Here is another Aus-8 Spyderco that I have, stumbling over my words there. You can see this is the Clip It Rescue. That is my own personal knife, but from the same era, and just figured I'd throw that out there as well. So really cool little vintage Spydercos there. The Jess Horn Lightweight, again, one of my favorite knives of all time, honestly. Just a great profile, great in the pocket. If this knife had a deep carry pocket clip on here instead of this lanyard hole, I honestly would have zero complaints about it, and it would be pretty much the perfect EDC knife for myself. So I don't mind a mid-lock or back-lock design. That's just me personally. You can see if you try to open it rapidly, you're not going to be super successful there because it is a smaller knife, but just cannot admire this knife enough. Honestly, it's, you know, it's just FRN. It's not like it's anything fancy handle material wise, but it just looks so cool with the Jess Horn name throughout, and then of course the Spyderco horn logo there. But really love this knife. You can see horn right there. They don't have a maker's mark on the back of the blade, which is typical for a lot of their designers. Typically they will have a maker's mark. I mean, I'm not trying to be confusing there, but definitely a huge fan of this knife, as I keep stating. And I think that's going to be it for this video. So if you have made it this far into the video, definitely let me know in the comments below. I am always curious to see if anybody watches these videos all the way throughout, especially something like this, you know, vintage Spyderco, where it's not a new knife hitting the market. So, you know, there's not going to be information that's extremely pertinent to a new potential buyer, for example. So as always, though, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I really appreciate you watching. Thanks.